Greetings to all the learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is Globalization and Development Dilemmas, looking at the case study of migration. In this lecture, we shall analyze globalization, issues concerning development with a special focus on migration. We shall also be looking at the important insights for the subject at hand presented by World Migration Reports. In this lecture, we shall debate that how today migration, globalization and development are buzzwords for any parlance, and they are very significant in several academic disciplines. In this lecture, we shall explain how international migration is an important aspect of both globalization as well as development. In this lecture, we shall deliberate on important findings of international migration reports and discuss the dynamics of globalization and development with the focus on migration. To begin with, what do we understand by migration? Migration implies movement of people. Now, there are different aspects of migration. Internal migration, for example, when there is movement within any country. There are movements of individuals and families from one area to another. An example of internal migration, migration from rural areas to the urban areas. Then there is international migration, which implies movements from one country to another. Now, migration may be voluntary or forced. Voluntary migration, an example of it, search for better economic opportunities or housing. Forced migration, an example of that could be how people who have been expelled by their respective governments, say during war or other political upheavals. Also, when we are looking at migration, there are voluntary migration of refugees because of fleeing war, famine or natural disasters. Dear learners, as we are understanding the concept of migration, it is very essential to understand push factors and pull factors. What are push factors? Reasons people leave a country. Related to it and the parallel of it, pull factors. Reason they move to a particular country. Now, with this big understanding, we now get towards the aspect of globalization and migration. Dear learners, to elaborate on globalization and migration, we take reference to a very significant academic work, Elliot Dickinson's Globalization and Migration, A World in Motion, Roman and Littlefield, 2016. In this work, we look at globalization and migration, and as we go through the various arguments and insights presented in this work, the image that emerges is a dynamic, contradictory process that has indeed set the world in motion and incorporated millions of migrants into an economic market. And when we look at the ramifications of this economic market and the interface of globalization and migration, one gets the sense that its dimensions are unprecedented in human history. Now, the important highlight that the book points out, and we quote for the reference of our lecture, that while globalization is indeed eliminating barriers between countries, making it easier for goods, for capital to move around the world, as we always say that when we talk about globalization, it is about increase in speed, scale and intensity of people-to-people contact, transfer of goods, services and capital. The book makes an important aspect, an argument, that is, the industrialized countries of the global north are simultaneously putting up barriers to people and making it harder for them to migrate. So herein we get a contradictory picture. At one point there is increase in movement of goods, services and people, but at the same time one cannot ignore that how there are barriers which make it hard for people to migrate. In this scenario, in this context, we take reference to some important highlights presented by UNDP report, the Human Development Report in 2009. The report points out that is overcoming barriers, human mobility and development, the title of the report, and this book, in this report, there is a very clear aspect and assertion, that is, migration both within and beyond borders has become an increasingly prominent theme in domestic and international debates. History, contemporary evidence, as the report says, and we quote, suggests that development and migration go hand in hand. We are quoting this argument that migration both within and beyond borders has become an increasingly prominent theme in domestic and international debates. This is from UNDP Human Development Report 2009, Overcoming Barriers, Human Mobility and Development. Now, the argument of this debate, this insight that is presented by UNDP 2009 Human Development Report further points out that global distribution of capabilities is extraordinarily unequal, and that this is a major driver for movement of people. Migration can enable people to expand their choices in terms of incomes, accessing services, participation, for example. But opportunities open to people vary from those who are best endowed to those with limited skills and assets. Once again, we were quoting these arguments of distribution of capabilities as well as vagaries of opportunities from UNDP 2009 Human Development Report. Now, with evidence, as we are trying to deliberate on globalization development dilemma, looking at migration, we will now look at some important insights again in terms of deeper insights presented by the report, that with evidence this report points out that there are positive impacts of migration on human development, from increased household incomes to improved access to education and health services. Then at the same time, there are negative aspects also with reference to globalization, development as well as migration, that is, risks to human development are also present where migration is a reaction to threats and denial of choice, where regular opportunities for movement are constrained. Host country restrictions can raise both the cost and the risk of migration. We were discussing UNDP 2009 Human Development Report. Now, as we are deliberating further, we now take some important inputs from the report, that is how national and local policies, they play a critical role in enabling better human development outcomes for both those who choose to move in order to improve their circumstances and those forced to relocate due to conflict, environmental degradation or other reasons. Human development approach can be a means to redress some of the underlying issues that erode the potential benefits of mobility and or force migration. Once again, these were the inputs from UNDP 2009 Human Development Report. Now, as we are looking at globalization and development with reference to migration, it is very essential to understand that since 2000, IOM has been producing various world migration reports. World Migration Report in the similar vein 2020, which is the 10th in the World Migration Reports series. This report affirms that migration is a part of today's globalized world. Let us take reference to some of the important highlights of World Migration Report 2020 to increase our understanding with reference to the topic at hand. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the lives of millions of migrants and their families and undermined progress in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. This report, World Migration Report 2020, found that 2/3 of all international migrants live in just 20 countries. The United States of America remains the largest destination, hosting 51 million international migrants in 2020, equal to 18% of the world's total. Further, the report points out, and we quote, Germany hosted the second largest number of migrants worldwide at around 16 million, followed by Saudi Arabia, 13 million, Russian Federation, 12 million, and the United Kingdom, 9 million. India tops the list of countries with largest diaspora in 2020, with 18 million persons from India living outside of their country of birth. In 2020, nearly half of all international migrants resided in the region from which they originated, as the report points out, with Europe accounting for largest share of intra-regional migration, that is 70% of migrants born in Europe reside in another European countries. The report further points out that share of intra-regional migration amongst migrants originating in sub-Saharan Africa was 63%. At the end of the spectrum, Central and South Asia had the largest share of its diaspora residing outside the region, followed by Latin America, the Caribbean, and North America. The report also points out that nearly 2/3 of all international migrants live in high-income countries, in contrast with just 31% in middle income. Once again, dear learners, we are quoting from the highlights of World Migration Report 2020. Further, when we look at this report, International Migration 2020 highlights by the Population Division of UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, we get the sense that spatial distribution of transnational population varies greatly. Then, as pointed out earlier, that India's diaspora is largest in the world. It is distributed across a number of major countries of destination. 2019, the International Migration Report also presents some important highlights. That is, total number of international migrants, when we look at the year 2019, is estimated at a big number of 270 million. Now, but once again, this is a very small percentage of the world population at that time, that is 3.5%. Vast majority of people globally, that is 96.5%, are estimated to be residing in the country in which they were born. The top destination countries remain the United States, and more than half of all international migrants, for example, if we look at the number presented by the report, 144 million, they live in Europe and North America. The IOM, as it was first known, the Provisional Intergovernmental Committee for Movement of Migrants from Europe. This was established in 1951, and the reason, the cause of establishment of IOM was that how displacement of Western Europe following the Second World War, how it needed to be studied with respect to movement of people, with the focus towards migration amongst others. Today, IOM is a leading intergovernmental organization working under the mandate of the United Nations in the field of migration. It works closely with governmental, intergovernmental and non-governmental partners. With 173 member states and further 8 states holding observer status, IOM is dedicated to promote humane and orderly migration for the benefit of all. With this, we come towards the next aspect of development and migration. Now, herein, as we are looking at development and migration, we shall take reference to the very important report from the World Bank, that is Moving for Prosperity, Global Migration and Labour Markets, the World Bank. Now, the inputs of this report give us a sense that how migration has had an impact with reference to the development dynamics with the focus towards the labour market. The report points out, and we quote, this work says that migrants' incomes increase 3 to 6 times when they move from lower to higher income countries. Further, the report points out distances in space, culture and language are inherent impediments to mobility, imposing an estimated 30 to 50% tax on migrant wages. This empirical study finds that, it quotes from the empirical study that increased labour mobility leads to large gains for immigrants and positive overall gain for the destination country. Global migration pattern leads to high concentrations of immigrants in certain places, industries, occupations. Now, looking at the big picture of how globalization, development and migration has had this very complex interface, the proposed solution in this World Bank work, Moving for Prosperity, Global Migration and Labour Markets, the proposed solution is, and we quote from it, labour market oriented, economically motivated rationale to the political opposition to migration. As we are debating on globalization, migration and development, we take reference to a very important work that we found at UN.org. The work is by Rafis Arbazov, Globalization of Migration, what the modern world can learn from the nomadic cultures. Now, in this work, there is a reference to the Kazakh migrants, and the work points out that migration always existed. An example of it, the nomadic tribes. And when we look at the present times with reference to movement of people, innovation, competition, development of information and communication technologies, new media require speedy recruitment, deployment and redeployment of talent. In this aspect, there are various issues of migration which indeed have a bearing with reference to globalization as well as development. Now, what are these issues of migration? Quoting from the work, first, security of local jobs. Second, cultural compatibility. Third, difficulties with integration into local cultures and societies. Now, to look at it today, migration is a reality. As pointed out that the author gave examples of the traditional Kazakhs that moved constantly from one place to another and developed a whole cultural universe of social norms and perceptions around migration and movement of people. So, what we see here is the argument that the author points out that nomadism is a never-ending movement of the human soul. So, seen in this perspective, the issues that Rafis Abuzov raises in his article on globalization of migration, namely security of local jobs, cultural compatibility, difficulties of integration, indeed are very important with reference to understanding globalization development, keeping the focus towards migration. What is needed? As we conclude, the proposed reform here could be that one creates better policies, more bottom-up actions in dealing with ever-growing global movement of people and cultures. This is an important perspective presented from the work of Rafis Abuzov in order to understand globalization of migration and presenting some very important insights with the focus towards the study of the traditional Kazakhs. Today, indeed, migration has come a big way. It is a very complex reality of the modern world. It has a huge bearing with reference to development as well as globalization. What is needed is a right policy approach. Create better policies in order to ensure better benefits to both host nation as well as the home nation with reference to movement of people and cultures. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture on globalization and development dilemmas, looking at migration as a case study, presented to you significant inputs and insights. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.